I also feel a little bit disingenuous. My career, I would say, certainly my recent career, prior to moving on to coaching myself, has been coming on board as a product manager and product leader, maybe before the company should really have one.
Hear, hear.
What do I mean by that? I think that the work of product leadership, and I think this is a place where the three of us agree, and most people in the Supra community agree from the conversations I've had, right? The work of product leadership, setting a product vision and a product strategy, and at a tech company, the product vision and product strategy should be really the same as the company vision, the company strategy. Setting those things belongs to the founders, belongs to the CEO. I am extremely sus of a founder and CEO who wants to bring somebody on to do that work for them.
Welcome to another episode of Supra Insider. This one was a fun one. We welcomed Josh Herzig-Marx. I actually got to know Josh about 1.5 years ago. I met him through Lenny's community, and I asked him if he was interested in being one of our first Supra facilitators. And he agreed, and since then, I've gotten to know him well. He's become someone that I rely on for advice, and he has a really interesting journey. He is a former founder that sold his company to Google back in 2012. He's also been a head of product at 3 different companies. And about 2 years ago, he made the big decision to leave his salaried work so he could support his family and kind of allow his wife to have a career. So we had a very fascinating talk about that and other things.
Yeah, we started by talking about that transition that Josh made and the intentionality that went behind it. And we also went into the specific books that Josh's wife is writing, which I loved hearing about as a new dad. A lot of parenting advice baked into this episode, or at least links to go learn more about parenting advice. And then we went deep on that, transitioned back into product and talked about that founder first head of product or founding PM relationship and why Josh believes that founders should really own product in those early days and wait as long as possible to hire that first product person. And then we went into a few other areas that are just specifics around Josh's views of the role of a product coach and how product coaches and just coaches in general can evaluate fit with people that they're considering working with. And this was probably one of the more conversational podcasts that we've had. It was a lot of back and forth and a lot of questions that Josh asked Mark and I as well, which we of course enjoyed sharing our perspective. So we really hope you enjoy listening to this one and let us know what you think.
Awesome. We're live. Welcome, Josh.
I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. But yeah, I'm very excited to have you here too for a lot of reasons. You were one of the first facilitators that we brought into Supra. You've played such a key role in helping me get Supra off the ground. And you always have good advice, good perspective. And I generally enjoy talking to you. You have a lot of wisdom around the product world, around being a founder. So yeah, what I would love to start is, I know about 2 years ago, you made this big shift in your life where you decided to retire from salaried work to be able to focus on family and also giving back to other product leaders. Walk us through that decision. Why did you make that decision? And now where are you focusing your energy on?
Yeah. First, I want to say the decision to have the person who had been the primary income earner, the primary earner in the family, like, quote, you can't see me doing air quotes if you're not on YouTube, but quote, retire from salaried work is a really privileged decision. My wife had been the primary parent for the first 13 years of us being parents. And I hadn't fully appreciated what that meant for her own career until I saw her career start to take off. She's trained as a clinician, but for quite a few years, she's been mostly a writer. She writes books about parenting, and her 5th book is actually on pre-sale right now. It's not for parents, but it's about how to stop freaking out. It's for younger kids. Her writing is really talented. She's written bestsellers.
What's the name of the book that's available now, Josh?
The book for kids, if you have a kid 10 to 12, maybe like 8 or 9 to 12, they call this middle grade ages. It's called How to Stop Freaking Out. It's available on Amazon. We can put links in the show notes.
Yeah.
She's written some great books for parents. She wrote How to Stop Losing Your Shit. It came out just before the pandemic. It was a pandemic bestseller. How to Stop Losing Your Shit with your kids. really good timing as all of these parents find themselves at home with their kids
Those are great
all
titles.
the time, losing their shit. Yeah, it's a title that sells itself, right? It's a great story in product marketing. She wrote another book after that called You Are Not a Shitty Parent. It's for all the parents who are feeling guilty about the way they're parenting, trying to convince them not. The idea is, one is a book about mindfulness and parenting, how to stop losing your shit. It just doesn't talk about mindfulness because no one wants to hear that. And the second book is a book about self-compassion, maybe even more important, a little bit lower on the need scale, right? If How to Stop Losing Your Shit is a book on the aspirin or oxygen level of the oxygen aspirin vitamin scale of need, You're Not a Shitty Parent often feels a little bit lower on the need scale, but maybe is even more important for you as a long-term parent. And what she was hearing from parents and frankly from kids is they wanted a book that kids could read that had fewer swear words in it, which was definitely a challenge for my wife. She has a fantastic potty mouth. And they wanted a book they could share with their kids and their kids could read that could give concrete tools for managing what's really like a very anxiety provoking moment in your life, which is being a teenager. Concrete skills, an understanding of why your brain is doing the things your brain is doing. And this book is fantastic. And I'm looking forward to lots of kids reading it. And as you can hear in my voice, I'm really proud of her. And as she was writing these books, again, this is the 5th book that's been published so far, and she's written a bunch more, hopefully some more coming out. She also had been working at a literacy nonprofit, and she wanted to get back into clinical work. And these are all things that I wanted to let her put as much time and attention as she wanted to into them. And the best way that I could do that, to step forward in our family, was to step backwards in my professional life. So, Mark, as you said, about 2 years ago, we realized that we could afford to do this thing. I could, air quotes, retire from salaried work. And I did that not because you can't find work-life balance, a lot of people can, but with my own personal undertreated case of ADD, if I wanted to make sure that I didn't forget my kids at the bus stop or something like that, which is a thing I might have done a couple of years ago, I had to make sure there was like nothing pulling on me harder than my family and my responsibility to be that primary parent, to be that lead parent in the household. And for me, work has always been so important and so valuable and frankly, so all encompassing that I just didn't trust myself. And so part of that commitment to the family was that commitment to step back.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And did you have a plan at all, or were you like, hey, I'm just going to stop working. I'm going to make my main priority being a present dad, and then we'll see what unfolds?
There is definitely a lot of that. I think that's the gift of privilege, is to be like, yeah, we'll figure things out. But one observation that I had made and that my friends had made is the things that I got most excited about in my professional lives as I had gotten older and more experienced were those random conversations where there's a person who was in a situation and having a really hard time. And I had seen this thing before. I was like, okay, I know what's going on, right? This is like situation 16B that early stage product people go through. And I know what's going on. And you can't always fix these things, but you can normalize the experience. You can provide a little bit of context. And as a result, people feel a lot better. And I found myself enjoying more and more of those conversations as my network was expanding, as first COVID and then post-COVID allowed us to interact with people who weren't necessarily geographically or professionally proximate. My network expanded across the entire country to people, companies I wouldn't necessarily have connected with before. And I found that really valuable, personally rewarding. And I looked for ways to do more of that. One of the ways is having an open calendar. People can just go ahead and schedule time with me for any particular reason. If you Google me, it's easy to find. And part of that came by asking people to invest in that kind of a relationship, which is just a fancy way of saying coaching, mentorship, and advisory work.
Yeah, it's resonating a lot for me. I have a 1.5-year-old, so I don't even can't imagine what it's like to want to be present for these middle school, high school years in that way, and I'm very excited about that. But
well, I'll tell you, the kids feel mixed about it, which is the summary of the middle school, high school years.
I mean, I'm sure they're happy to have more of you around. If I had to guess, I'm sure that
sometimes
they're probably noticing you're more present. And if you're like me at all, if we share this characteristic, I think I get a lot of my self-worth and a lot of my fun, like joy out of life from work in a lot of ways. I mean, I certainly love spending time with my family, but it's a completely different kind of joy to be working. And so my question that I'm curious to get your thoughts on, Have you been surprised at all about what it's been like for you now that you're a couple years in? Like, are there things that you are observing about yourself now that you're in this phase that were very hard for you to imagine when you made that
Yeah.
decision?
I think some people wake up in the morning and they realize their calling is coaching or work like that. That they find the thing that gives them the most professional joy is this kind of coaching or mentorship or advisory work.
Mm.
And I discovered that wasn't me, actually. Like, I like my clients. I like the work we do. It feels very satisfying. I feel proud of it. I feel proud of them. I'd love to talk more about that. But I really love building things. And I really love building things in the context of building an organization, building a company. And maybe I spent, how old am I now? I'm 47 years old, so 45. I can't do math. Like, I've been building organizations since high school, right? Starting teams and clubs, doing this in college as well. And then obviously that's been most of my professional focus since graduating. And maybe it's just I've been doing that for so long, but those are the things that I continue to find most meaningful. And I miss that. And it's okay to miss that a little bit. And it's okay to say that part of my life is on hold and I'm going to do something else for a while. And then maybe in a couple of years, I mean, older daughter's going off to college in 3 years, my younger daughter in 4 years, cross your fingers. Hopefully they'll be out of the house at that point. Like, what am I going to do with the second half? So I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And I suspect I will go back to professional full-time work afterwards because I do find so much joy in it. This is a different kind of joy.
As you've been supporting founders and actually, could you just maybe speak a little bit to the type of coaching that you're doing right now? Like, who are the types of people you're working with? Like, when is it a really good fit for you that like energizes you where you feel like really excited to engage?
That's an important question. And I have a little bit of a bias in favor of people who keep a sharp focus on things where they feel like they have something to contribute. And I know not everybody does. For me personally, I try to keep my focus on 3 roles at basically one stage of company. And those roles are solo product managers and first-time heads of product. And not surprising, a lot of times, all 3 of those roles are all in the same person, but not always. And I focus on those roles because those are the ones where I have the most experience and feel like I've had the most lessons, both positive lessons and negative lessons. And the company stage I focus on is the very early stage one. Post-seed, pre-Series A is a great time to start. Series A companies, maybe some Series B companies. But I'm very much a early stage company and small company kind of person. You know, you hit 100 people, you close your Series B, and I nope out of there because the sorts of challenges the company is having tends to be ones that I'm less interested in myself.
Mm.
And as a result, I have less experience there. So when people do reach out to me who are, you know, at a Series B or a Series C or a public company or something much later, I'm much less likely to think I'm the best person to work with them. I'm much more likely to go refer them out. Actually, I refer everybody out. I think everybody should talk to a couple of coaches or mentors or advisors before choosing one. I generally won't feel up for working with them then because I think they'll be better served by somebody else. Sometimes people in like biz dev roles will want to work together. I've done some biz dev. I was a mediocre salesperson once upon a time. I did a lot of biz dev at Google. There are better people than me. I think everybody deserves to have some kind of support from a coach or a mentor or an advisor. And it should be somebody who's fantastic. And there's almost always somebody who's more fantastic than I'm going to be for them. And I want them to have that relationship.
I love that. And maybe something that I want to pull a little bit further to the thread is you said that you like to work with people that have a very sharp focus. Is that related to if you are working for an early stage company, you have that sharp focus, or is that something that you're also looking independently? And do you have any examples of what that looks like, or how do
When
you
I
look for
refer
that?
out, when I refer out, I like to refer out to people who have a sharp focus that comes from their actual lived experiences. And this is actually something that is key to Supra's DNA. I don't know, Mark, if you remember this from our very first conversation, but you talked about the importance of speaking from experience. And when you're giving somebody advice or giving somebody feedback or giving somebody perspective or just listening to somebody empathetically and reflecting back, being able to have a shared experience with them is incredibly valuable. As I look at founders and startups that are struggling, right, one of the classic struggles is you bring on an early stage employee who has had great success at a different kind of company, right? I think a common example is you bring on your first technology leader, right? Founding CTO, founding engineer, founding lead engineer, whatever that person is. And maybe they've worked at big companies and were incredibly successful there. But the transition to a small company is rocky, is a challenge because they don't have the reps in them yet to have the judgment to know, like, what are the important areas for me to be focusing on? What does an appropriate cadence look like? What are meaningful rituals at a company of this size and stage? And the danger is they recreate what worked for them at a large company, and it just doesn't translate down to an early stage company. I think the same thing happens for people doing advisory and mentorship and coaching kind of work as well.
So what you mean by the same thing happens is that people who are doing advising might try to copy paste what worked for them in a different environment and not meet the person that they're advising or coaching where they are.
Or they might not see the important pattern, right? Or they might fixate on the wrong aspect. I'll give maybe a more concrete example from outside of coaching and mentorship work. One weird request I get from a lot of people is to help them find psychotherapists, which
interesting.
I feel a little bit uncomfortable with, but people like have this continuing request because it turns out that a lot of the behaviors that we see as being maybe uncomfortable, but commonplace and not necessarily bad at startup tech companies are things that like raise the antenna of psychotherapists. Like, are these good relationships? Are you maybe too invested in work? Like reasonable questions. But it's nice to have a psychotherapist who has experience with lots of people who work in tech startups so they can have a better sense of, is this a thing which is uncomfortable and unpleasant for everybody in tech startups? Or is this something which is particularly weird and particularly bad in the place where you're working? And if you don't have that experience with patients who are at early stage tech startups, you might fixate and focus on the wrong thing, like long hours or thinking about work outside of the workplace, right? Which might be wrong in other kinds of companies, but is very much like a quality of great people at great tech startups. The same thing happens in coaching and mentorship as well, right? If you have a sales coach or a sales mentor or a sales advisor who is, I don't know, really focused on automations and really focused on meeting notes and isn't sufficiently focused on ICP because ICP always came to them from the marketing department, then they might miss the fact that the company hasn't sufficiently drilled down into a narrow ICP for which they can be successful. That's a more concrete example that comes up.
Yeah, I see something similar with very early stage founders who are maybe coming from bigger companies and starting a company where maybe they spent the last 4 or 5 years doing like longer term strategy planning stuff, and the execution was just on autopilot. They just assumed great execution, and they go into a startup and they don't have that execution discipline and rigor as much.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting mismatch. So what kinds of questions do you ask people when you're trying to determine whether you think you could be helpful to them or whether they're going to be coachable in the way that is going to make it worth your time?
That's a good question. I mean, my questions themselves are fairly generic, right? I want to understand more about the context of their situation. And I'm a concrete thinker, so I want to hear it really concretely, right? What's the high level in the company? Who's at the organization? What are their roles? How does the product work? Where are they in terms of funding? What is the overall org structure, right? What does their team structure look like today? Concrete questions like, how does their current role fit into their overall career, right? What parts of their current role feel familiar? What parts of their current role feel new? I ask them why they're thinking about coaching or mentorship or advisor or bring on an advisor right now, right? I want to find out if they had any experience in the past with somebody doing this kind of work for them so we can find out what worked or what didn't work. I want my kind of like the magic question that a lot of people ask is, if you could wave a magic wand and fix all the problems that you were feeling today, when you woke up in the morning and started to work, what would you notice it was different? As another way, this is the magic question amongst coaches and therapists, another way to get at what is the problem I think they're trying to solve. And we talk about logistics and pricing and how often we'd meet. And those are the general questions. I'm not using these necessarily as screening questions. The biggest thing I'm trying to figure out is when I talk to somebody for the first time is who else in my network should they be talking to? And I maintain a nice list of coaches and mentors across a range of startup disciplines with experience working with very early stage companies. I think a lot about who to match them up with. And then I think a little bit about vibes. I'm not so experienced at this that I have a clear heuristic or a clear rubric, but does this feel like the kind of person who I'd be happy talking with for an hour every single week for the foreseeable future? And I don't always get the vibes with everybody, and that's okay. But for this to be a good business for me, it has to feel sustainable. And if I'm like, yeah, the person seems great, but we're not really clicking, then I don't want to force it. That's going to reflect poorly on our relationship, maybe not the first couple of meetings, but eventually.
Makes sense. And now maybe talking about Sorry, you're going to say something.
I was going to ask if either one of you had worked with coaches or mentors and asked, like, were there questions that they had asked you that you felt helped you figure out if they would be a good fit or not? Turn this around to the person on the other side. By the way, I'll be taking notes for this and potentially adding it on to my onboarding questions. So
I think the most valuable questions that I find in like an introductory call with someone that makes me crave another conversation is when they read between the lines and ask a thoughtful question that maybe calls the premise of why I want to talk into question. So like, for example, right now I've got a portfolio of things I'm spending my time on, and I'm feeling a little insecure about that. I'm not committing to any one thing to like focus on and spend all my time on. And I was talking to someone recently, and they're not a coach, but it was like a really good coaching question that if someone asked me this, I would be like, I want to keep talking to you. They asked me, why do you feel like you need to decide? Right. And that I've been chewing on that for like 4 days now. And so I think those kinds of like questions that have me really get the story clear in my head, I think are really helpful. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah. I don't know if there's a specific question, but for me, the most impactful intro calls that I had with coaches are when I get like a small simulation of what it would be to work with them. And basically when they push my thinking, or they, similar to what Ben was saying, they like question my assumption and be like, hey, like I need to do this. And they'd be like, wait, why do you need to do that? Or they demonstrate somehow that they've either seen the problem before or they've helped someone solve that problem before. I think that makes me feel like, oh, cool. Like if this is what's going to feel like every time, like I could see how this is going to be very valuable. I think the other thing that to me that's super effective, helps me build trust very quickly with coaches, is when they're very transparent about like, here are all the reasons why we shouldn't work together. Because it makes me really feel like for them it's really important to work with the right person, as you were saying, I think bias, but also like they also want to make sure that they're adding value, right? And that their work is impactful and they take pride of that. And to me, that's very important. And I think usually what I find is that the more experience people have, the more comfortable people are at doing that. And they've learned the lesson of like, sometimes you have to say no to the wrong customers to find space for the right ones. But yeah, maybe now shifting gears a bit. I know one of the questions that you ask people when you're trying to figure out if it's a good fit is, trying to figure out the org structure. And one of the really messy parts of org structure for early stage companies when it comes to product is trying to figure out whether you want to hire a head of product or a founding PM. And I even feel sometimes like sometimes those mean the same thing. Like sometimes the founder don't even know what they need. So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts there of like, how do you see the differences? And then how do you recommend the founder think on one versus the other?
This is one of those questions where the answer is always, it depends, right? And I think these are the least satisfying kinds of questions to answer. I also feel a little bit disingenuous. My career, I would say, certainly my recent career, prior to moving on to coaching myself, has been coming on board as a product manager and product leader, maybe before the company should really have one.
Here.
What do I mean by that? I think that the work of product leadership, and I think this is a place where the three of us agree, and most people in the Supra community agree from the conversations I've had, right? The work of product leadership, setting a product vision and a product strategy. And at a tech company, the product vision and product strategy should be really the same as the company vision, the company strategy. Setting those things belongs to the founders, belongs to the CEO. I am extremely sus of a founder and CEO who wants to bring somebody on to do that work for them.
Can you just say the words why? Like just
why?
Go a layer deeper. Why does that raise flags, or why are you sus about that?
Yeah, company strategy and product strategy, that is what your company is about. And for a founder to say, I don't want to do that, tells me either that there's a lot of things it could be, right? And this is the work that somebody like me would explore, but what are the possible reasons why, right? One is they feel like there's some sort of magical technical skill which a person could learn or develop, and they just don't have it, and therefore they have to bring somebody in better. So there's like an imposter syndrome sort of situation. I'm not good enough at this kind of work. It could be because they feel out of ideas, right? They feel like they've done the thing that they thought they were going to do and it hasn't been successful, and it's time to bring in new blood or somebody else. It could be because they find the work emotionally unpleasant, which is, I'll say, at least half the time, maybe 2/3 of the time, that's what it is, right? Product management, we're all product managers here, can be a profoundly unpleasant profession, right? You are constantly, continually disappointing people, not delivering the things they thought you should be delivering, having to tell people something's going to be late, doesn't match the picture inside of their head, whatever the reason happens to be. And the founder doesn't like that kind of unpleasant work and doesn't want to do that and wants someone else to do that kind of unpleasant work. So this is, however, the work of building your company, right? If you are an investor, right, would you want to invest in a founder who says, well, I don't know quite what it is I want to build. I don't know quite why it is I want to build it. I don't have a really clear picture in my head of who the customer is going to be. And I'm not sure I want to develop a picture. I just want to run the company and be the founder. Like, you're not getting investment. Like, this is the work of what building a company, a tech company is, which is building the product itself, is. Who are you building it for? What is the problem you're solving? How are you going to reach them and communicate the value? How do you get them to pay for it? How are you going to make sure you actually deliver that value? Right? Those are the fundamental questions that a product manager is being asked and a CEO is being asked.
I agree. I think I have.
I want to hear the but.
Well, I don't really have a but. Like, I agree with you. I think the thing that I struggle with sometimes talking to founders who want to work together is I sometimes try to tell them, I think this is your work to do. I don't think you should hire someone. I think you don't have product market fit yet. This is your job. And I think a lot of them don't want to hear that. And I think I want to be helpful. And I'm curious if you've found if you have any examples to share or even a heuristic for how do you make someone maybe get comfortable with something that's uncomfortable for them? Because I think you just listed out a few really, like, those are like deep things for a founder that if they don't think they're able to do the product job well and it's their company on the line, how do you convince them that they could do it well enough to kill their own company in the act of trying, right?
Well, I'll say that this is a place where the work of the founding product leader and the work of a fractional product leader, which is some of the work that you do, Ben, and the work of a product coach or mentor or advisor really is the same. Your job in all these cases is to scaffold the founder. That's the word that I always use, right? So you're not taking away the responsibility from the founder by doing it, and you shouldn't be, right? You can't be doing the work for them, but you can give them a framework to actually get better at it. One of the mistakes that I made early on when I was doing more coaching, and this is one of the reasons why I don't describe my work as just coaching anymore, is I would help provide insight into what the founder should be doing or helping them understand what was holding them back. So I had one client who was really struggling to provide a roadmap to the board of directors. She was really great at running her teams and working with engineering and sales and all that, and was doing a fine job there, but was really struggling with the board side. And we talked about it for a couple of sessions, and we got good insights into why this was a challenge. I was able, to provide her with some readings and some frameworks about how to do it. We talked about the reasons why the board wanted it, and we came back the next week and she had made zero progress on this board deck for the board of advisors. And the thing that I didn't realize at the time, but have come to realize, is that all the insight in the world isn't going to be enough if the person doesn't have like the skills to actually apply it. And that's a place where, what do? I popped open a template and I started sharing my screen. I was like, you talk, I'll type. We started working on it and started filling this thing in. And I think that's the thing that a effective early stage product leader at a company, maybe too early, can do, is they can provide that kind of scaffolding, like actually doing some of the work and teaching the founder how to do that. But what does that take? That takes A, right, a founder who's willing to change, right? And B, it takes a early stage product manager or product leader with enough experience and judgment and wisdom to be able to flex themselves and their style to help the founder. It's going to be really hard if that person has 1 or 2 years of experience, or if this is even their first product management job. It'll be really hard if they never worked in an early stage company. It'll be hard if they've never been a founder of an early stage company. So, Mark, to go way back to your question, what does it take to get them comfortable with that? The one thing I can't do is have them be willing to change and have them willing to struggle. That's a thing that no coach or advisor or mentor can actually do for them. But if they're willing to stretch themselves a little bit, the very best thing you can do with them is to get a couple of times for them to practice doing the thing. And if you support them, people tend to be a little more comfortable doing something uncomfortable or unpleasant. I'm not a sports guy, but this translates really well to people who are serious athletes or seriously into fitness, right? Which is, it's really hard to read a book about rock climbing and become a rock climber. And it really helps to have somebody who's experienced, particularly somebody who's experienced as a trainer for a rock climber. One of my clients is into rock climbing, so we use this analogy a lot, right? To sit down and take a look at the climb they're about to do and map it through and be on belay for them and be shouting encouragement from the bottom and reminding them of the plan they put in place. And then once you've done it once before, it becomes easier to do it the second time. So sitting alongside somebody, Mark, to answer your question, and doing some of the hard work that they feel uncomfortable with them, builds that confidence, yes, but also builds the reps and the experience. So they start to have the experience of, okay, am I doing this thing well or I'm not doing this thing well? And they can start to self-manage themselves.
Yeah.
Feels like a lot of words from Josh from a fairly small question.
No, super helpful. I think a question that I see a lot in the Supra community is I'm thinking of joining an early stage company, right? And I think maybe people start to see those little red flags of, hey, it's interesting, right? Like the founder wants to delegate the vision to me or the product strategy, which, as you said, it's probably like something that you should look deeper. So I'm curious, like, is there anything that you would recommend those people that are considering joining as head of product or even founding PM to suss out when they're talking to those companies and really figure out, hey, does this founder have the ability to be coached and figure these things out versus like, actually, this is a lost cause and run as far as you can because it's not going to work out?
Well, I think the first thing is to ask yourself the question, right? Do you think that you are able to coach this founder, right? And this is the question that I ask myself before starting a company is, do I understand the problems the company is having today? And do I have a good prediction of the problems the company is going to have next in the future? And do I think I can solve those problems? And a lot of those times, those problems are technical problems, are product problems, or organization building problems. And sometimes those problems are like problems that the founders have, right? I was a mediocre founder once upon a time. I had lots of problems, and a lot of them I got better at, and some of them I didn't, right? Do you think you can do that? And this is a subset of the problems. So do you think you have understanding of the challenges that the CEO is facing right now? And what in your experience or temperament or knowledge of yourself do you think that you'll be able to help that person solve those problems? Not solve them yourself, but help that person solve those problems. So that's the first question you have to ask.
Is that true even if they're evaluating like a full-time role, Josh?
Yep. I think it's true for a full-time role as well. I think part of the work that a founding product leader at a company does is that kind of upwards coaching.
And that means that basically, to be more concrete and specific, does that mean that you have to had experienced either being a founder or being a head of product at a Series A company, for example? Is that, or if not, like, how do you get started there, right? Because like it's almost kind of like a chicken in the egg.
I have no idea, but something inside of you, right? So, this is a place where my limitations as a very new coach and mentor come into play, right? And the limitations of my experience, right? I know where my confidence came from, right? It was from being a founder myself and then from doing this role a couple of times, right? You gain confidence from each one of those. I don't know where somebody else would get that from, but you'd have it from someplace, right? You should have that confidence from someplace. And certainly everybody I've met inside of Supra, right, I've been very impressed with. And one of the things that impresses me is, largely these are people with extremely high EQs, emotional intelligence, and that involves a lot of personal self-reflection, right? Why do I think I have this? Right? There is a pathological version of this where I don't think I'm qualified for anything, and that's no good, right? But you should have the reverse of that as healthy, which is, do I have a good understanding of the situation I'm walking myself into, and why am I confident that I can do this? And it might be because I learn fast. It might be because I've got a great network of people I can fall back on. It might be because I know that the company will let me bring in a coach or mentor or advisor to be this head of product for the very first time who can support me in this process. And I think if this is your first time doing it, that's a really good reason to have some confidence. And I have a great network of people I'd be happy to make referrals out to.
Josh,
who are really good at this kind of work.
I would love to get your take on something I've been toying with, an idea, which is I've noticed that I am one of the people that's very comfortable in that kind of early stage first product person role. And in my
Mhm.
experience, it doesn't have a lot of longevity for
Yeah.
it. Okay. And what I mean by that is I come in and I'm an accelerant in a lot of ways to the company growing up. I'm modeling a lot of the behaviors that you've described. That's a lot of what I've done. And what I find is that it gets to a point where I can remove myself from the picture and things are just running and they're running well. And that's the point where I usually get bored
Yeah.
because I don't feel like I'm needed anymore.
Yeah.
And so my question for you is,
And Ben, maybe to get more specific in your situation, do you feel you're not needed anymore because the product team is humming, the engineering team is humming, and you feel like the company's growing but not quick enough to build like a bigger product team? Or is it also like you just don't really have any interest in like building the product team and removing yourself from the execution?
I'll refer back to something Josh said earlier, which is I think that it's good to constantly be reflecting and thinking about where you get the most energy and where you feel like you're contributing the most. And what I've found is I love coming into a situation that's like a mess and then getting it to be high performing. And then once it's high performing, I don't get personally excited about taking it from like high performing to like super high performing. I love to take something that's like people are literally not clear on what they're supposed to be doing right now and giving everyone the clarity to know what they're supposed to be doing for the next month, and then helping them figure out how to continue to run that, like even going from that to like monthly planning, and everyone's always clear on what they're doing for the next, sometimes it's 6-week cycles or whatever. But like, I don't get excited about helping a company go from we know exactly what we're doing for the next month to like, here's what we're going to do for the next year. Like that, if it's not my thing. Now, if I was the founder and it was my company, I get very excited about that longer term planning. But for some reason, doing that for other people at this point in life feels, I agree with Josh. I think there's people that are probably better at doing that than I am. But I think there's not a lot of people I've met who are as good or get as excited as I get about taking a complete kind of like shit show situation and turning it into like a pretty high functioning situation. And so my question yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah. How did you, since Mark and I are asking questions about this, think back to like the first time you were in that position and you got a shit show into a well-functioning organization and then you started to feel like maybe you didn't want to be there anymore. How did you feel about that? Did you feel pressure to stay,
Yeah.
to demonstrate you could do a scale up? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there is. So the first thing I'll say is that my longest role that I've had, which was 3 years, really six distinct 6-month jobs. So every 6 months, the job really evolved, and we're not going to go down that whole story, but like that's the longest role I've had with one team is like 3 years. And when I look back to that, is every time we had chaos and we got in order, and then a whole new thing happened, and there was chaos again, and I got into order again. So that for me was the environment that cultivated me wanting to stick around. What I've felt myself get disengaged by is coming in. There's a lot of ambiguity. I get it into clarity, and then what I feel is a sense of there's some sense of shame with leaving because I haven't been there long enough, and really hard things take a long time to do. So there's a sense of shame of like maybe not being the kind of person that's going to stick around to do all those future hard things. There's a sense of insecurity around future job searches, right? Which is especially true earlier in my career where people generally look down upon short stints on your resume because they assume something like bad happened or they assume that you weren't good enough or whatever. Whereas in my head, it's like usually I'm bored. This got boring faster than I expected, right? So I think that's part of what I feel. So I stick around. I've given myself the rule, always stick around at least a year. I think that's, but yeah. Why do you ask?
I'm curious, mainly. Yeah. And it's always nice to hear people who have similar experiences. And I think this particular part of it doesn't get talked about enough either. Often the people who end up on podcasts are people who, they start off as a first PM and they, grew the company to, billion-dollar status. And those are great stories. But there's, I think, a lot of people out there who really love those early moments of a company. And because they've done it a lot, they bring a lot of wisdom and experience. And so back to Mark's original question, which was, how soon do you hire somebody? Right? The answer is probably later than you think, but especially if you are bringing on a product person earlier than maybe you're getting advice to do, bring on somebody more experienced than you think you need, because you're going to benefit from that experience, that judgment, that wisdom of a person who's done this same thing a couple of times when you haven't. And I just want to, I don't know, have people say that out loud, that like, yeah, I like the stage of companies.
But but Josh,
yeah.
my question that I was going to ask after that whole tangent was like, do you think a lot of early stage, like the first product hires should be actually not full time? Like they should come with an expiration date, or they should come with more of should they mostly be fractional, because the job in a lot of ways could potentially become redundant once you do it well for 3 to 6 months? Like if they come in and they can do a really good job of modeling the right behavior for the founder, and then they could walk away and the founder can just run the product function at their own company, why should both sides try to keep the PM role intact? Why shouldn't the happy path be to dissolve the role after 3 to 6 months?
I don't think that's going to be true for everybody. I think that certainly hit a certain size as a company, and you hit a certain size as a company, and the CEO can't be the only product manager anymore. So maybe in very early days, that does make sense. But at some level, I think that having a fractional
pre-product market fit is mostly what I'm thinking about. Yeah.
The short answer is I don't really know. There's a lot of companies. There's a lot of models for things. I think it's really hard to make a generalization. I do think that there are two reasons why founding product leaders have a short tenure. Only one of them is they get bored. That's certainly been my experience. I last about 2 years in roles, and then we've gotten ourselves the size of a company where the problems that we're facing aren't the exciting ones. Much more of my time is spent doing cross-functional alignment with the other leaders inside the organization, and much less of my time is spent like on the things I really care about, which is building the product. And there are people who love this, and I just don't love the companies or the products we're building enough to want to stick with that part of the work. It becomes sufficiently unpleasant, and there's enough early stage companies out there, and maybe I'm too dumb to be worried about where my next job is going to come from, or I've been too lucky in the past. There's always been one. So like, I just, I find another job.
I mean, I think the other reason
the other reason is important though, right? Like, it's a shitty job to be the first product manager, especially if it's the founder's first tech company and they don't realize like how painful the work of building a product actually is. Jason Evanevich, who does coaching for founders and product managers as well, he's a tech guy. He wrote this great piece. He said, the job you want is to be the second first product manager, because a first product manager is just breaking in the CEO, is just breaking in the founding team and helping them learn what does it mean to go build a technology product? Like, why is it so much harder than you think it's going to be? And you spend 12 months having everybody simultaneously appreciative of your hard work and a little bit disappointed in how everything's happening. And you're just preparing them for the next person to come on board. And one of the most rewarding relationships I have is I'm now friends for one of the tech companies where I was that first product leader coming in, first product manager, first product leader coming in, more experience than they thought they wanted, the level of experience they really needed. And when I left, they hired another product leader after me, and they were fantastic. And I feel good about getting to, break ground for them to make their job a little bit easier by setting up systems in place, by having people go through the process of things being late, things being delayed, not everything having the level of usage that was expected, all the disappointments that we're all used to in our product lives.
I mean, I think the other reason why people have short stints in early stage companies is like, I feel a lot of times like it's just really hard to suss out like the company and like how competent everyone is and the culture. And I think, sometimes you have to realize, hey, I made a mistake and I have to get out. And I think it's, as Ben was saying, I think it's a really hard thing to do given that there's this stigma around short stints. But I think like it should almost be normalized, right? Because I think like you're taking a big risk. You need to almost work with those funders and the team to actually know if it's going to work out or not. Like, it's really hard to, in like 5 hours of interviews, know if it's going to work or not.
It's interesting that we're talking about short stints. We all have different definitions of it, right? Ben, for you, a short stint might be a year, right? Because after a year is when you want to leave, but you also have mixed feelings about it. You feel badly about it. You worry about, how is this going to reflect on you? For me, a short stint is 2 years, right? But I feel precisely the same feelings, Ben, that you feel. Am I leaving too soon? Is it because of some personal failing or hole in my own abilities, right? Am I not demonstrating it? So I don't actually know if short stints are looked at poorly, at least not for getting other jobs in early stage tech companies. I
As
don't
long as you
know
have a
that
story,
people are so good at hiring. Yeah, I don't exactly. I don't know that people are so good at hiring that they're able to like make that a universality.
the people
I
that
know
I know
we're
that artificially stick around, I think like overstay their welcome in a job that I know, I think they learn to just rationalize the sense of not being where they need to be. They stay, and I think again, huge generalization. There's a bunch of reasons to stay in jobs, but some of the people that I know that stay a year, 2 years after they told me that they want to leave is they just accept it, right? There's like a giving in a little to that. They don't think they can do better, maybe, is sometimes what's underneath it for some people, or at least not right now, or they have a
Yeah.
financial responsibility. There's a bunch of reasons, but for me, that's when I get secure. Yeah, Mark's pinging me that we got to wrap. I think I agree, because I think we all have we got to drop in a couple minutes, but this has been, I want to keep talking for like 2 hours. So I think we got to find another time for part 2. But Josh, just so we can put a bow on this first conversation that we had together, first question that we like to ask people as we're wrapping up is, where can people learn more about you and your work? And second is, how can they be helpful to you?
Sure. So my parents blessed me with amazing SEO, which means you can type Josh Herzig-Marx into literally any search box and you'll be able to find me. I have an open calendar. I have a couple of websites. I'm on LinkedIn. You will find me on Twitter. Don't tweet at me because I don't log into that thing nearly enough. I will probably miss your direct message. Yeah, but reach out. You can email me. I'm all over the place. I'm easy to find. How can people help? I think that everybody professionally deserves a boss who knows what they're supposed to do. And for a lot of time, if you are a solo product manager, it is likely that you don't. You're reporting into a CEO who doesn't have a product background, or you're a first-time head of product, maybe with a decade of experience, but your first time sitting at a startup and wondering, like, how is this thing different? You should reach out to me. I would love to talk, book some time with me, and I'd love to help you find the kind of support which you need. I think everybody deserves it. This is what I'm doing professionally, but more importantly, I have a whole network of people with different experiences, different personalities, different strengths. I'd love to help you find that right connection, and nothing would make me happier. So I really hope people reach out and fill up my calendar.
And check out your wife's books, I think was another one, right?
Yes. Check out. Oh, thank you. Yes. I'm going to hire you for our marketing. Her name is Carla. You can stick her link in the show notes. If you are a parent, her books are fantastic. If you find yourself losing your shit with your kids too much, it's a great book. If you find yourself losing your shit at work, it's also a pretty good book. And if you have kids ages 8 to whatever, teenage, and they're struggling with anxiety and big feelings, I also recommend pre-ordering her book, How to Stop Freaking Out.
Nice. And also a quick plug. You did a really fun episode with Adam Fishman on the Startup Dad podcast.
Oh, we did.
Where
That was so much fun.
It was you and your wife. And I don't have a kid, but it was such a fun episode to listen to. We'll put that in the show notes as well.
Thank you. We had a great time doing that. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of my wife, which is good.
Awesome. Josh, thanks so much. This has been so much fun. And as Ben said, I'm really excited for part 2.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Mark a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.